Hey, everybody. Really excited to be here keynoting the Domestic Supply Chain Summit. I'm JP Hampstead, host of Bring It Home, the podcast about American reindustrialization and the manufacturing renaissance, all things reshoring. Have a great show for you guys lined up today. We're bringing in a guest, Ty Findley, who's an investor in what he calls digital industrial innovation. And we'll hear all about sort of the exciting things that are happening at the intersection of technology and America's industrial base. But first, I want to get started off the way that this show normally goes, which is just a discussion of some recent headlines. And the first one today is that AstraZeneca has unveiled its new factory, a $300 million facility in Rockland, Maryland. It's part of an ongoing $3.5 billion investment in the United States, both in R&D and production. Hot Pack, a Middle Eastern food packaging company, has committed $100 million to establish its first U.S. manufacturing facility. This is a 700,000 square foot facility in Edison, New Jersey. And then the biggest headline I have for you today is that Bristol Myers Squibb said that it will invest $40 billion in the U.S. over the next 5 years in pharmaceutical research and development and domestic manufacturing capability, including radiopharmaceuticals, which are those radioactive drugs that are often used for diagnostic purposes. There's sort of a very expensive, technically sophisticated manufacturing process to make those radioactive dyes and other radiopharmaceuticals. It's interesting, the two large pharmaceutical stories this week. We've seen a whole big slew of those really over the past few months. Really, all of the major pharmaceutical companies are investing heavily in the United States, either expanding old facilities or building new ones from the ground up. Big pharma kind of tripping over themselves to get to the front of the line and make these gigantic multi-billion-dollar announcements. It's been really interesting to watch, and we've discussed it with Craig on previous episodes of this show. But it's a trend that we expect to continue, just because of the high value of the goods, the sort of favorable business and political climate for that kind of investment in the U.S. right now. The fact that the pharmaceutical companies want to be close to their end customers, and the explosion, obviously, of new classes of drugs like GLP-1 agonists and other biopharmaceuticals. The United States has always been one of the leaders of innovation in the entire medical industry, but especially in pharmaceuticals. And it seems like this current wave of reindustrialization is just sort of cementing America's leading position in pharmaceutical research. And I think it has really interesting implications and knock-on effects for, you know, uh, certain kinds of logistics companies, certain kinds of, value-added warehousing, cold chain transportation and logistics, specialized sorts of courier services for parcel carriers like FedEx and UPS that have started to build really lucrative lines of business in serving healthcare providers and connecting up those sort of like urgent yet fragile products to their end users. So I'm excited about that trend to see where it goes. But now it's time to bring on our guest, Ty Findley, co-founder and general partner at Ironspring Ventures in Austin, Texas.
Welcome back to the Scenic City, everybody. It's time for the Future of Freight Festival 2025 edition. And this year, we've got some surprises up our sleeve. You're going to join us in Chattanooga at the end of October. We're still going to have everything you love about F3, the speakers, the fun, the incredible atmosphere. But this year, we're dropping you in the heart of Chattanooga. We're taking you to the historic Chattanooga Choo Choo. We're going to have our live music at the Signal this year once again. We're going to give you the experience that you can only get from a FreightWaves event. Go to live.freightwaves.com, get your tickets. We'll see you in October. You don't want to miss it.
I'm here with Ty Findley, co-founder and general partner at Ironspring Ventures in Austin, Texas. Ty, how are you today?
I'm great. I was thinking about us jumping on the call today, JP, and what a day of all the things going on with all the discussion of reindustrialization to the name of the show. And I was even thinking back, I think it was 2019, JP, when we wrote our article up in FreightWaves about why VCs as a venture capitalist, why they specialize, why does this industrial supply chain specialization matter? So anyway, it was just great to see it all come full circle on the chat today. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad you could be here with us. Ty, you helped found Ironspring Ventures, which specializes in industrial startups and in the industrial value chain, both software companies and hard tech and manufacturing. Have an all-inclusive approach. You helped start that firm back in 2019. I'm curious to hear what you saw back then as the opportunity, and maybe how the climate and the attitude toward industrial companies has changed since then.
Yeah, well, the short story is, if it's not more of a topical discussion now than ever, I don't know what validates the thesis. Now, there's still a ton of work to be done, but just really feel blessed to be doing what we're doing. And 5 years in, we just crossed our 5-year anniversary in January. More attention, more network building than ever to support, we use the term digital industrial. I'm happy to define those industries later, but exciting time to be doing what we're doing. And really the origin story is kind of the underlying foundation for everything we do at Ironspring. We just listen to the real world operators and go visit facilities, factories, logistics networks, just listening to that. And, the reason we do that is that's where me and my partner Peter's backgrounds come from. The short story, I grew up in the middle of nowhere, East Texas, a couple of generations of family-owned manufacturing businesses. So all of this stuff I do now and what we're watching in the news with tariff and trade, very personal to me, and very personal to millions of skilled laborers that really drive a lot of I think it's half the GDP when you roll up a bunch of the industrial sectors. So I do that. I spend some time at the Boeings and GEs of the world, really watching how the big manufacturers operate, where supply chains, the 787, a global experiment to distribute that manufacturing that ultimately ended up coming back domestic. So for me, and then now a decade into venture investing in digital industrial, it's just all I know how to do. And then my partner, Peter John Holt, very humble guy, 5th generation family member, that ultimately their family started up Caterpillar way back in the day. And now in his day job, runs Holt Caterpillar, the largest dealership here in the country, amongst other things involved with Holt Group. So really my point there is, this is what we come from. It's what we care about. In venture land, we always talk about GP market fit. We're not just chasing the latest fad because reindustrialization is cool or whatever's been in the press. We just really, really want to talk to operators because that's where our passion is. So,
yeah, that's great. That's great to hear. I'm curious, I feel like a lot of our audience, they're familiar with sectors like freight tech and the software providers that have grown up to sort of serve and automate and help connect the transportation industry with its partners and its customers. But can you tell me a little bit about the sorts of companies that Ironspring looks for?
Yeah, happy to connect dots, because really our thesis is that they all are interconnected. When you think about the word supply chain, it really is a big word. A lot of people still need to define how they think about it is up for interpretation. But for us, we use the term digital industrial innovation. That's really what our focus is on. And for us to go a layer deeper, we really bifurcate that into 4 sectors just to make it easy to understand what we focus on. Transport and logistics. JP, you know my story with FreightWaves and multiple other logistics companies in our portfolio. But we also focus on manufacturing, construction, and then alternative energy, and really a lot going on in that broader category, how alternative energy is impacting logistics, manufacturing, and construction. So those are the four sectors, if you'll think of it, that we focus on. And maybe to go one more layer deeper, really the core of all of this is regardless of which of the sectors you're discussing and all of the things that we'll talk about today, reindustrialization, they all have the same value chain regardless, which starts with you design some product somehow, then you build it by some form, fashion, or another, even new innovative methods like 3D printing, if you will. Then you have to transport it, whatever modality that may be, before you ultimately operate it in the field somewhere. And so for us, we believe across all those sectors, if we can bring innovators to take on different pieces of that value chain and help connect kind of that digital thread, again, not to use a buzzword, but just that connectivity, we really think there's a lot of efficiency to be gained. And we always say productivity, security, and sustainability are where we think we can really drive an impact through our venture capital lens.
That's fascinating. Another thing that I'm curious about with digital industrial innovation, Ty, is sort of the profile of these founders. I feel like in pop culture and in the media, people have a sense of what a tech founder is supposed to be like, what their background maybe maybe they went to Stanford and Y Combinator or something like that. But you've invested in companies from all over. Many of the founders that Ironspring is backed have sort of this real world operating experience. Can you talk a little bit about maybe how there's a different pipeline or a different kind of typical founder profile from a run-of-the-mill software startup?
Sure. Well, no right answers here. We're still trying to figure it out, just like anyone. But we do have enough data at this point, 5 years in, where our biases are. It was actually fun. Craig came out to our annual summit. We were actually discussing a lot of this on stage, where one way or another, that founder or that founding team, for us, we've seen they really do need to have deep domain expertise. Right? They need to use the term. Run through the idea maze of every facet of that industry, right? You can't really stump them, but then you can get to that edge point of like intellectual curiosity where no one knows the right answer, but they know that domain cold. I'm not going to have to, if it's logistics industry, go ad nauseum of the difference between a shipper, broker, and carrier, right? Amongst other examples. So what we've seen is we definitely need to see a bias to there is some connectivity and grounding in the industry. What I would equally say, though, is important as we've seen companies and in venture capital, we have a portfolio, not always work out the way you want, but the ones that we've seen so far, they can equally pair that domain expertise with an equal amount of respect for great product and engineering talent that maybe know nothing about the industry, or maybe they come from that industry, right? Take Convoy, a lot of alumni coming out of there. We've backed some of them. But point being, if you're wanting to build a technology company, you have to move at a very high velocity, moving product forward. And so that DNA, I guess my point of bringing this all home, we won't invest on either end of the bill, right? The barbell. One side would be just pure domain experience, and they don't really have any networks or talent to connect into product and engineering. They may have to figure it out on the way. And on the other end, just straight up tech and product engineering talent, but they're chasing a TAM because it's a big opportunity or because it's the latest fad. I'm still pro. We need 10x more founders, 10x more capital to solve these really hard digital industrial challenges. So I would never not say I'm open to seeing it work. But your question of where our biases lie are just really in the middle of that barbell. You bring both domain experience, but you also understand how to move product and engineering really, really fast.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Recognizing that startups have a certain kind of velocity and ramp baked in a lot of times that they have to hit their marks and need top talent to do that. But at the same time, you can't just start a construction tech company because you think construction is a big sector. You really have to be deeply familiar with all of the nooks and crannies of that idea maze. as you called it. No, that's really good stuff. Um, I'm curious, Ty, if you could talk a little bit about just the current moment we're in. I don't necessarily want to say that give President Trump sort of the responsibility for reigniting a discussion about American reindustrialization, because I think that it's become a part of the bipartisan consensus. We saw things like the CHIPS Act and the Infrastructure Act pass under the Biden administration. But can you talk a little bit about everything that's going on now? We've had interviews with groups like the New American Industrial Alliance, and we've talked to policymakers and thought leaders in Washington. I just want to hear kind of from your perspective as an investor. Has that made a difference to you? Are you seeing more companies be founded? Is it easier to partner with different investors on things? How has this affected sort of what you do and the universe of companies that you look at?
Yeah, I mean, just foundationally, I think this is phenomenal that so much attention has been placed on this discussion, right? Because I'm sure, JP, with all your prior discussions, everyone goes down the list. COVID, geopolitical tensions, the tariffs, all of that has accelerated. The most important part as a venture capitalist is finding great talent. Almost to your first question here about what does it look like? Finding great talent, I can assure you back in 2019, there was not near as many founders building in these categories as there are today for all the reasons we could discuss. But I think, what also has to, you got to go back in the history lesson a little bit. We won't go too far, but, if you even think back to the 40s when the Bretton Woods alliance was stood up, post-World War II, coming to an end, I think the United States did a phenomenal job. I think it was 44 countries. How do we secure international trade and really up our game when it comes to finance? And so when you kind of run that forward all the way through all the different experiments, and I mentioned Boeing is 787 outsourcing production all across the country or across the world, good intentions. But ultimately where I think the discussion now is, and this is why founders are pouring in, and I think there is an altruistic reason. It's not just because big TAM, big opportunity. It is now at a level of, I think everyone can agree, a national security concern that we get this right. And I've spent a lot of time, grew up in manufacturing. I'm not the person here to claim, well, it's all just coming back to stateside immediately where, everything is US domestic. That's not how global supply chains work. I do think there's going to be a great recalibration. One of the themes we're really excited about is how do we deepen our trade alliance with our partners in Mexico. We actually have some startups that are logistics oriented. Monterrey, Mexico is only 2 hours away from that great Laredo border, where I think last October, for the first time in a long time, that Mexico is our largest trade partner. They took over the title from China. And I sit only 300 miles north of that Laredo border. So a lot of that freight's going to be running up through here to DFW. So my point of that is I think all should be on the table, both reindustrializing, however we want to call it, reshoring here domestically, but also the nearshoring or friendshoring, all these other buzzwords that have been thrown out over the years. That opportunity is now incredibly evident. And I would say one of the things that we always struggled with was how do you make this topic personal to everyday Americans, regardless if they're in these industries or not? And when we got to COVID and everyone realized not just, the toilet paper is not on the shelf anymore, but when your family member can't get a ventilator produced in the hospital so that you can actually, manage through that process, everyone really woke up. That became a personal dinner table issue. And I think a lot of pride erupted in this country too, politics aside, that now have really just thrown fuel on the fire. And again, Ironspring Ventures, we feel really blessed to have been investing in this category because we do think it takes years of relationships to earn that trust with manufacturers or logistics operators, rather than what I do think, a lot of people are now interested because of the big TAM and the big opportunity. But you better have some great relationships. Obviously, JP, you guys included as well. So that's where I'll end my comments.
No, that's great. I really appreciate that. I want to drill down into manufacturing a little bit. How you mentioned COVID, geopolitical tensions as being kind of a wake-up call. You also mentioned, Boeing's like struggles to get 787 deliveries up to plan. Um, and that makes me think that, some of the key sectors for reshoring manufacturing, have to be things like, medical devices and pharmaceuticals, defense, aerospace. Are there other? I'd like to kind of hear your take on sort of, the target sort of verticals for manufacturing, or where you think the biggest opportunity is. And that can be either from an investor's perspective, in the sense of, a great market, an interesting problem in a great market, or it can be from, the perspective of, which sectors does the government want to bring back? Which sectors is the government going to sort of support and protect, in that way?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many opportunities broadly defined in manufacturing. I think the obvious one that we all know is the chips production. That we have a very small island that is controlling a lot of chip production, and so the idea of, and again, it just transcends even the current administration with the Chips Act and things of that nature. I think the idea that we are protecting ourselves, and a part of this tariff discussion is also around rare earth minerals, and how do we make sure that we aren't shut off from those. And so it was really great to see, I think just yesterday, right, all of this China news start to break and easing some of that tension. So semiconductors and all the associated parts of fabbing and producing them, I think we can all look at the map and see all the production facilities being stood up to take on that, which is great. You've got clearly from a national security perspective, a lot of aero and defense opportunities here. Maybe one to call out amongst others, because it's getting a ton of attention, is shipbuilding and all of the legislation that's getting passed. We're not an investor, but I just think it's a really great, cool hometown story here for me in Austin with Saronic. They actually bought a shipbuilder down in New Orleans now, and so the idea that we're going to start bringing that production capacity back home, and for all kinds of reasons, goes beyond just national security as well. I think that is something that certainly has invigorated, even from a venture capital lens. Defense tech has become a major source of investment and founder activity. And then I'd probably throw out the pharma and medical supply chain as well. Again, we talked about ventilators as one amongst others, but there are lots of medical needs in this country that, again, when COVID hit, we were very exposed to a lot of different opportunities that, again, if we think of it strategically, maybe, and this could transcend all of those sectors included, maybe it doesn't have to have complete raw material to finished good production line here domestically. But if there are production facilities that can partner so that the timeline and the scale and honestly, the labor issue that we should talk about, or the opportunity for the lack of labor, if we find creative ways with both Mexico and Canada for some of those tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, I think that all plays together rather than, this idea of a magic wand, a factory just pops up from start to finish. That's just really hard to do from a supply chain perspective. And why would we do that when we have great allies on both sides of the border there? So 3 amongst many others that are definitely going to be a beneficiary, I think, of the reshoring of manufacturing capabilities here.
I definitely agree that Mexico and Canada, have a huge part to play, and I think that, as we, push back against China and sort of reorient our supply chains, for other reasons, for just sort of proximity and resilience, that North American economic integration is just a long-term trend that will and must continue to grow. But since you mentioned the labor, Ty, why don't we go there? One of the oft-cited sort of obstacles to reindustrialization that we sometimes hear is that Americans don't want to do certain kinds of jobs, or they don't know how to do certain kinds of jobs, that there aren't enough people, or the right kind of people in the right spot. And to me, like, those objections have always, felt kind of like special pleading and a bit of a straw man as well, because, it's it's a little absurd to sort of make generalizations about a country of 300 million people when we're talking about, individual factories that have to be placed in specific locations in existing communities of real people. And so I'm curious, like, sort of what your thoughts are about the labor situation, if there is a so-called labor manufacturing gap, and if there is, how do we bridge it?
Yeah, just from real world experience, and I was in the engineering ranks at both the Boeings and GEs of the world. All of my conversations with those CTOs, what keeps you up at night? What are you looking to solve as we go hunt for whatever, but project I was on? Never was the answer number one, oh, I need to figure out our AI strategy, or I got to figure out robotics. It was, I have a skills gap coming because there is a retirement age. There is a general ethos about manufacturing where JP, I've gone to a lot of factories over the years. If we're just talking manufacturing specific, logistics could be included in that environment, where during your modern life, you've got your iPhone out, you've got your iPad, you've got a computer, you're instantly connected to all of your apps, instant gratification. And then in a lot of environments, you then throw next generation labor into the Stone Age, where their work environment has no digitization. It's a cultural thing that comes with that too. Now, again, I think the ethos of what we're seeing with the pride in the country, bringing the reindustrial base back is helping that challenge. But I would say, beyond my own experience, there are some stats out there, and I do give credit to one group, specifically Deloitte, who I think has been on this for a long time, really focused in on the right survey results. I think their latest Manufacturing Institute survey said something like 3.8 million new employees needed in manufacturing between now and 2033. And their estimate is that somewhere around almost 2 million may go unfilled simply because of what we can define as the skills gap. And what I mean by skills gap is these jobs, and I want to come back to break apart this word jobs because I think it's a misnomer, but because these jobs, they're not going to have the right skills to fill them. And so I think there is real validity to that, and where we need to figure out whether it's through trade schools or different efforts that I'm very bullish on how we could advance those types of opportunities for folks that, college may not be the right opportunity, but could still make a phenomenal living. I think I even saw some stats from some of the Caterpillar dealers who are in our network around what a skilled trade technician, they can make an incredible earning potential over the lifetime. It has nothing to do with a college degree or not. So again, I think there's some false numbers that need to get set aside. But really getting back to this question about jobs, and as a venture investor, I often get asked about, well, is robots and automation just going to take away the jobs? And I first start by saying, during COVID, if there was any time for the rise of the robots and humanoids to take all of our jobs away, that would have been the moment, and they failed miserably. Ain't going to happen. I'm pro all the innovation going on in humanoids and other warehouse automation efforts, of course. But what I would say about jobs, to bring it home, I think that word should be split apart into occupations and activities. Are occupations going to go away? No. Again, I think there will always be an evolution of, where, of course, right? People talk about, horses and cars, and they always go down that path. But I do think you have to think about the activities within those occupations. Innovation is coming. It is going to take what we think of as those dirty, dull, dangerous activities that people should not be doing anyway. But if you upskill them into 21st century, digitally oriented, higher paying wages, we think those occupations benefit everyone to have an evolution, as opposed to just this complete displacement that in theory sounds good. And again, I'm a venture investor. We're optimists at our heart. But I also like to bring some soberness because I've grew up in all of these industrial sectors. We focused on it since we started Ironspring Ventures. There has to be a respect for how these industries operate as well. And so that's our rough stance on all of it.
That's interesting. I mean, the jobs, question, the skill gap question is fascinating. And I also love, I think the automation aspect of it, or the robotics aspect of it, has always been, maybe from an investor's perspective, it helps sort of, bridge the gap between, labor costs in like different countries and things like that. But for many people, it's sort of a boogeyman that, it's like, oh, the robots are coming, there won't be any jobs. But I want to offer up an interesting example. uh, the largest auto factory in the U.S. today is Toyota in Georgetown, Kentucky, and it employs about 10,000 people. A long, long time ago in the late 1920s, the largest auto factory in the U.S. was the River Rouge plant in Dearborn, Michigan, Ford's plant that employed about 100,000 people. And so, and it actually made about twice as many cars as the Georgetown plant, meaning that the modern Toyota workers are about 5 times as productive. But what interests me about these gains in productivity is that you can build a major auto plant in a small city that most people have never heard of. It doesn't you don't have to go to Detroit or Los Angeles or Atlanta or Phoenix to have enough labor to build a gigantic multi-billion-dollar production facility. Automation actually opens up economic opportunity for tons of other communities all across the country that now actually do have the labor resources to support those kinds of operations. I'm curious what your take is on that.
Completely agree. Again, by proxy of growing up in East Texas, right across the Louisiana border, Shreveport, Louisiana was one of GM's largest facilities, and it was phenomenal labor, phenomenal talent. So I agree, and I think you've nailed it on the flip side of that discussion about jobs. Industrial automation is going to play a massive part in bridging this gap. It's unquestionable in my mind. And if Secretary Lutnick said the word robot one more time, we'd all be mandated to buy one. So regardless of the robot joke, industrial automation is again going to have a great role to play to allow opportunities for those ecosystems that may be called Detroit to be able to bridge great talent with industrial automation that allows that facility to actually hit what ultimately has to be a business model for there to make a case for them to produce whatever it may be out of that factory. And I do think you can do that in a more regionalized manner outside of the large metros. And if you don't believe that industrial automation is going to play a big role, I think as we speak right now, I couldn't make it this year, but one of the largest industrial automation conferences of the year, Automate, is going on in Detroit as we speak. I think they say they're going to break the record. I don't know, 40,000 people. I forget the stat off the top of my head. But again, the ethos of that room, or at least the people who know these industries and have a respect for it, it's not about, again, let's just go invest in a bunch of robots and they'll do everything with a lights out factory and it'll just all be streamlined. No, it's like we have to do this to be able to bridge the gap alongside our great talent in this country for the economic case and honestly the labor shortage to make sense for us to be able to take advantage of what we need to do, again, for all the national security reasons we talked about.
Automate. That sounds really cool. I'll have to check out some of the content coming out of that conference.
Oh yeah, I highly encourage you guys to.
Ty, this talk of the skills gap makes me think. Is there room for something like a CNC machine operator boot camp in the way that we have like coding boot camps and programmer, and things for software engineers who maybe they're picking up skills or they didn't go to college, but they want to get a really fast introduction to a lucrative industry. Have you seen anything in like ed tech or things like that would support the reindustrialization of the U.S.?
Lots of different efforts popping up specifically on how do we get those skills proliferated faster. And I would first start by setting aside my bias to venture. And I'd give a big shout out to the MEP network. And if folks have never heard about the MEP network, underneath the different layers of the federal government is an organization called NIST, which sets all of our technology standards. Underneath it, just to help you find it, is MEP, the Manufacturing Execution Partnership Program. I forget what the P is for. But in each state in this country, including here in Texas, including out there in Tennessee, there is an MEP branch that really is dedicated to saying, hey, we have a long tail of manufacturers and industrial operators in this country that should not be forgotten just because we all see the logos of Ford and Boeing and Caterpillar and John Deere. We need to train that next generation of leaders. And so I want to give them a shout out because I think they have a big role to play here. And so anyway, I'll let folks look out for that. But I do think that's where a lot of this should start. From a venture perspective, we've seen all kinds of talent management, skills training platforms, whether it's marketplaces to connect skills with jobs to be done in more of a flex capacity. Because I'm a really good CNC operator, but I want to run my YouTube channel for 2 days out of that 5-day work week, right? Give them flexibility to do what they want. I think that entices more from a lifestyle perspective too. It entices more people to train up on CNC because they could use that in a more flex capacity. I've seen call it workflow softwares that are aggregating all of this tribal knowledge back to the CTOs of the knowledge transfer that's about to walk out the door. How do we start to digitize those skill sets into work instructions that are templatized content that could be more scalable across organizations rather than a 9-month apprentice to just make sure you know how to use the machine? And then maybe just culturally, and this one's not even from a venture perspective, publicly traded company called Protolabs. I don't know, a decade ago, I walked the facilities with their prior CEO, Vicky Holt, and they had 50 CNCs digitally connected together with one operator able to, from one pane of glass, really understand in manufacturing a big metric called OEE, overall equipment effectiveness. What's your throughput? What's your yield? What's your quality? I think the idea that then again, that cultural issue of you give people and empower them with digitally oriented 21st century jobs. I think there are also some outstanding examples already in this country, even publicly traded, that if we can just share more of those stories, and this is why I really appreciate what you guys are doing on the show, putting this on a mantle, giving practical examples, and really just kind of, again, waving the flag of why this is so important and how we could do it right if we put more focus on it.
That's great. And to ask you to tap back into that venture capitalist optimism, Ty, I want to close by asking you, what you see as sort of the biggest opportunities for Ironspring Ventures to participate in American reindustrialization, and also, I want to hear a little bit about your vision of what the next 10 or 20 years could be like if America, the government, the private sector, the citizenry really execute on this plan to rebuild America's industrial base.
All right, the last one's a doozy, but I'll try to knock off where I think the first part of the question, maybe a macro comment of how does Ironspring, how do we add to this ecosystem? Then I'll give more of a what is interesting just thematically is one example amongst others, what we're hunting for. The last one, I don't know if I'll have a good answer, but a 10-year outlook. The first macro comment, and this is where, again, I'd encourage any and all capital providers out there, if you're not already thinking of industrial supply chains or you're not on the reindustrialization bandwagon yet, there's more room. I would never say don't jump on. Just know that there's a time and a trust and an appreciation for how you approach these sectors. And so what I hope macro level Ironspring brings to the table for the founders out there, we really do know and study these industries deeply. Our quarterly calls with operators, that's where we get our feedback loops. We know if you're talking about SaaS metrics or if it's a hardware business, the metrics associated with a hardware as a service model. We all know that you have to understand that as an investor, but more importantly, you also have to understand how these industries buy, when they buy, who buys, what's the seasonality, what's the cyclicality. If you're going to invest in freight, you better get ready for the roller coaster and a whole lot of freight recession in and out articles that come with it. And we hopefully, again, just because this is truly the only thing we know how to do, I don't know what else I would be doing. We want to be that partner that can really help you appreciate what it means to scale in these industries in a thoughtful manner. And again, there's lots of ways to venture capital if that's your path. But we're definitely not in the camp of $50 million round right as you get set out the gate to try to go solve a logistics industry problem. It's going to take time. You got to understand how you get started. And I just think there's some nuance that we hopefully will continue to educate founders and play our small part on the back of the bus with an aperture that we get to see. Then more of a theme, if you will, we're really excited about because of all this reindustrialization. This world of wholesale distributors that is currently being discovered and uncovered, if you will. And we've had some big M&A opportunities from Home Depot buying SRS, $18 billion transaction to now Brad Jacobs onto his next $4 billion unicorn. and QXO is really going after the building materials industry to try to collect a bunch of different components. Beacon Roofing is being the big platform he chose to start with, and really tying a digital thread and efficiency into that industry is where we are really excited around how do we make this distributor category, because again, I bring that one up, regardless of its manufacturing being reshored or construction or logistics networks getting rerouted, all of it deals with materials being distributed, and usually these wholesale distributors have a role to play, and we think that's a big opportunity to bring efficiency. And so then the last part, I think, JP, was the 10-year, where does this all go? I really don't have a fancier answer than saying this is the last job I will ever have, if they let me, job in quotes. And I really do think the innovation economy, if it helps translate the right way, rather than just saying, here's AI and language models, I'm just going to force it through the system because the board said, what's your AI strategy? I think if the technology and the investor ecosystem approaches this the right way, I think the evolution of venture capital is either like a one or two go big and the rest just go bust and we don't worry about that, versus like really helping steward these startups through the curve in a thoughtful manner. Think of private equity. It went through the same maturity 2 decades ago as it really started to hit an inflection point. I think venture has learned so many lessons learned. Compute costs are down, all the things we talk about. It's easier than ever to start a startup. I just really hope that ethos, because these industries, you have to do it right. You can't just skirt past city council and ask for forgiveness later. You got people's lives on the line, safety's involved. And I just really hope we keep making a big impact, but also shepherding an industry to doing it in a more productive, efficient manner.
Ty, thank you so much for joining us. To the audience here, you can follow Bring It Home on YouTube. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, your favorite players. We're on Twitter. You can go to our website at bringithome.us.